Basketball coach at Mississippi State, took them to the Final Four in 1996, and he is the current color analyst on the Mississippi State Basketball Radio Network. Coach, I know you're into your off season from basketball, so I appreciate you spending a few minutes with us this afternoon. Just after 5 o'clock on Saturday, Florida Atlantic, and San Diego State will tip off the Final Four. Then in the nightcap, Miami and UConn will play. And we'll get into the matchups on the floor coming up in a minute, but I'm curious about all of the stuff this week leading up to tip-off, because it feels like for coaches and players and staffs and families, this is a week that, whether you want it to be or not, is different than anything that teams go through at any other time of the year. Is that accurate?
Well, it was for us, Richard, obviously. The only time that Mississippi State had been to the Final Four. And I think for all the first-time schools, it's so much different than you can anticipate. The media coverage, the national media coverage, interviews, radio interviews, TV interviews, ticket requests. Everybody wants to know if you have a hotel room that they can get. It's just so much different. And for us, once we won the regionals and came back to Starkville, then the next week was like a whirlwind. I mean, we had national media in Starkville. We had to set up interview stations out on the Coliseum floor and things like that, just things we've never dealt with. And that's one reason I think coaches that go back the second time and multiple times, you're much more prepared for everything involved in the Final Four.
You know, it's interesting when you look at this year's field. UConn's been there, right? I mean, they've got 4 national championships since 1999, but they haven't been there with this coaching staff. And I heard an interview that Dan Hurley was doing earlier in the week where he said he has reached out to Jim Calhoun, obviously, to talk to his team on multiple occasions. But he's talked to Jay Wright, and he's talked to Mike Krzyzewski, and he's talked to other coaches who have been there and said, help me understand how to manage my time and manage our team's time this week.
And I think that's smart on his part. I wasn't smart enough to do that, obviously. So I didn't know what to expect. But I think it's very smart on Danny Hurley's part to reach out to those coaches that have been to the tournament, especially those veteran guys that have been there multiple times, so they can kind of prepare him for what to expect. But even being prepared, or you think you're prepared, you're not prepared, because you don't know what it's going to be like until you're there. But I do think it's a little bit different for us, Richard, because, we're in a small Mississippi town, not a lot of media coverage. It's just different. Connecticut, as you said, they've been there. They've won a national championship. They're used to national coverage with the men's program and the women's program. And another thing for us, if you remember, we were in New York City. That's different than going some other places.
Yeah.
We fly, of course, we actually were staying in across the river in New Jersey. That's where the tournament was held. But we get off the bus at the hotel, and the first thing, I step off the bus, and Mike Tirico of ESPN standing there putting the microphone in my face, wanting to do an interview. It's just different. And coming from where we came from with very little media coverage relative to other schools, it was so much different for us. And I don't think that it'll be that different for some of the others. Now, FAU could be in that same situation. They're not a national program. They're a small school, and so not used to those things. But on a side note, I'm really pulling for FAU because the coach there is a personal friend of mine, and I've known Dusty a long time, and we've coached together, and I really hope they're able to pull it off. Don't know if they will, but I'd really like to see them win it.
So tell us a little bit more about Dusty May.
Well, I first met Dusty, and he said he remembers this. I don't remember this. Dusty was a manager at University of Indiana when Bob Knight was the coach there.
Okay.
And after I retired, I called Coach Boyd, who was a very close friend of Bob Knight, and Coach Boyd, who I'd worked for, and I said, Coach, can you arrange for me to go visit Coach Knight? I want to watch his practices and all those kinds of things. So long story short, it worked out. I could go. And I was involved in watching practices, film sessions, went on a recruiting trip with Coach Knight and all those things. Well, Dusty was a manager there at that time, and he remembered that. And then it just so happened at some time later, Mike Davis was assistant in Indiana at that time. When Mike Davis became the coach at UAB, he had me come over for a season as a consultant. Dusty was on his staff at that time. And so we got to be really good friends because we worked together that year. And then when Kerry Rupp was hired as a coach at Louisiana Tech, he hired Dusty at Louisiana Tech. And then Dusty had Kerry Rupp bring me in as a consultant for about a month during that season. So, we really got to know each other, and I saw Dusty work. I know how good a coach he is. And then when Mike White got the job at Louisiana Tech, he did not know Dusty May. Dusty was there on the staff, and so Mike called me and asked me for a recommendation for Dusty. And I recommended him as highly as I could recommend anybody. And Mike kept him, and then, the rest is history. He went to Florida with Mike, and now is at Florida Atlantic. And so, we have a long history going back. I think he's an outstanding coach, an outstanding person, a great family man. And I just think it'd be such a great story for FAU to win the national championship.
Visiting with Richard Williams, coached at Mississippi State. You know that, color analyst on the State Radio Network. So my guess is that you would maybe be a little sensitive to this question because you've been in the coaching business. But you also know that it's volatile. So when you look at Dusty May, he's at FAU. The ability to sustain the level at which they are winning right now seems unlikely, regardless of how good a coach he is, because it's been a magical run for them. If there is an opportunity for him to elevate himself to a better job, do you owe it to yourself to try to strike while the iron is hot, or can he be really careful about where he goes and stay put for a little while longer without losing any of the brightness of his star?
Well, Dusty and I have actually talked about that very thing, Richard, and you're probably aware of this. At one time, Dusty was thought of to be maybe one of the front runners for the Ole Miss job.
Yeah.
And Dusty and I talked about it at length. And, Dusty's response to me was, I love Boca Raton. And what's not to like about living in Boca Raton?
It's a good spot.
And he said, Coach, I grew up poor. Said, I'm making more money than I've ever thought I'd make in my life. My wife, my family, my boys, they love Boca Raton. I love our players. I love the kind of guys we can recruit. He said, and how much money does it take to be happy? And this is typical of Dusty May. One of his former mentors, I won't mention, said, Dusty, you've got to take a job like that if it's offered. It means your kids will never have to work again, the money you'll make. And Dusty said to me, that's just what I want to do, raise a bunch of deadbeat kids. that gives you an idea about Dusty May. Now, whether he'll take another job or not, I can't speak on that. I know he's very happy at FAU, though.
Well, and a heck of a basketball coach, and what an incredible story that FAU is. When you look at the matchups, the UConn-Miami game, Jim Larinaga has been in the business for a really long time. I'm sure you've got some familiarity with him from your years in coaching as well. And then Danny Hurley, who we talked about a second ago, who has just done an incredible job turning that UConn program around in short order. What do you think about that matchup in the night game of the first day?
Well, obviously Miami's really good. And I do know Jim Larinaga. We actually played him when I was at Mississippi State when he was at Bowling Green, and they beat us. And then Jim was also a Nike coach, and we were together a lot on some of the Nike trips because he was close friends with Dave Odom, who's a very close friend of mine. So we hung out together some. So I know Jim a little bit. Great coach, great person. His team is really good. They're obviously very perimeter-oriented. But from what I've seen of UConn in the tournament, I didn't watch UConn at all during the regular season, but during the tournament, I think they're the best team. And if you look at their scores, I mean, they're annihilating people in the tournament. The games aren't even close. And they're good in the perimeter. They're good in the post. And he's very demanding, very detailed in what he does. And, some people might not know, but Danny Hurley is Bobby Hurley's brother who played at Duke. Their father, Bob Hurley, longtime coach at St. Anthony's, a prep school up there in New Jersey. And he's one of the few, if maybe the only high school coach ever inducted in the National Basketball Hall of Fame. So the Hurley brothers come from a great coaching background. And Danny Hurley is an outstanding coach, and I think he has great talent. I think they're the best team left.
Should we be excited about this Final Four? Because it doesn't have Duke, doesn't have North Carolina, doesn't have Kansas, Michigan State, some of those blue blood names. It's a little bit different feel this year. No 1 seeds, no 2 seeds, no 3 seeds. How excited should we be? Well, personally, I can be really excited because I've always pulled for the underdog because we were always the underdog. And so I pull for those kinds of teams. So personally, I'm excited about it, but I'm excited about every Final Four because I love basketball. Now,
casual fans that are just not really locked into basketball day after day after day, maybe they won't be as excited because none of the teams, other than UConn maybe, have that national reputation. They're new teams, new coaches, people you're not familiar with. But I think that gives this Final Four just a taste of its own, if you will, a different vibe about it. And I kind of like that. I like to see some of the other teams that aren't as nationally known get involved and have the success they're having, because that's kind of the way we always work.
Coach, always appreciate your time and appreciate your perspective.